Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we're going to be talking about the most picked and the least picked secondary weapons in Deep Rock Galactic. So I've recently put up some polls on the channel asking which is your favorite of the most picked secondaries that we did not too long ago. So out of the winners of the secondaries, for Gunner we had the Bulldog Heavy Revolver, for Engineer we had the Breach Cutter, for Driller we had the Wave Cooker, and for Scout, we had the Boomstick. Some of these got the majority of the votes during their first poll. I was wondering how much that would actually affect them, similar to how the primaries worked. So out of the most picked ones, the most popular was the Breach Cutter. This one's not too surprising to me. Engineer has a lot of really great secondaries. They probably have the strongest set of secondaries, which is kind of how I thought that this poll and our least picked poll would go. Kind of a spoiler ahead. Breach Cutter won by 46%. That being said, the other guns did actually become fairly close. We had a tie for second place between the Bulldog Heavy Revolver and the Boomstick at 21%, and the Wave Cooker coming in at last at 12%. That being said, though, the Wave Cooker actually won the majority on the Driller secondaries when we just placed all of them together, where it won by, I want to say, about 20%, because the other two are fairly close to one another, EPC and the Sabata. Wave Cooker was, I think, about 50% of the total votes, though. So it won by a pretty big landslide. Here, it actually was the least picked. That's not to say the Wave Cooker's not good. It really is good. It's just it's competing against some other really good choices, too. So let's go over some of the reasons as to why people really like some of these. Breach Cutter, I feel like this one is a little bit self-explanatory because the Breach Cutter is so strong. A lot of people are aware of this. It does really high damage. It does really high damage per second. It's got some really great overclocks and some very fun ones. You have like Spinning Death, which is actually pretty strong against crowds and can be pretty strong against single targets, especially if you take the stun. You can take Roll Control, which is a super fun overclock, which may or may not actually give you any real advantage during a fight. Some of its other overclocks, like Lightweight Cases, is incredibly strong just because you get more ammo for it. You have Stronger Plasma Current to get even more damage if you think that that's necessary. Inferno to set things on fire. Return to Sender to do kind of magic tricks with the Breach Cutter. Have it go forth and back, potentially getting twice the value out of each shot, but you do lose out overall ammo. So you just got a whole lot of stuff going for you with the Breach Cutter. You can also shoot through walls with it, which is pretty nice. And you don't actually need to be fighting something like a Dreadnought from the behind. You can just attack it right from the face, just shoot it right through and hit it. That is a really big advantage of the Breach Cutter. And it works really well against big targets, crowds, flying targets to some extent. Maybe that's the one spot where it doesn't really excel at, or enemies that are long range, like Spitters and Menaces. Depends on how close they get to you, though. If they're in Breach Cutter range, they're going to die. That's kind of just how the Breach Cutter works. The Revolver and the Boomstick coming in second, having about the same amount of votes, is kind of surprising to me. I figured one or the other would win more here. Both are very good weapons, too. The Boomstick is very straightforward, and it has some pretty straightforward overclocks. I think all of its overclocks are pretty straightforward, besides, I guess, the special powder, but even then you just get a flying shotgun. A lot of people pointed that out because that was their favorite overclock, and I completely understand why. It's a super fun overclock to use. Gives you tons of mobility. It's not always necessary, but I mean, super fun. Jumbo shells, shaped shells, stuffed shells, or compact shells are all really good for it too, because all of those are pretty solid. The only not so great overclock for the double barrel is double barrel, where you're forced to shoot out both your barrels at the same time. It's fine against big enemies, and if you're only taking it for fighting big enemies, but if you're fighting anything else, or if you plan on using it for anything else, pretty much all the other overclocks completely outcompete it. Even, like, Stuffed Shells completely outcompetes it in terms of just what it can do, because it's just a straight upgrade from it. But if you can ignore that and you're just going with any of the other ones, yeah, Boomstick, super straightforward, really good weapon. Great for clearing up crowds, great for killing big things. Revolver is another one that people really liked because it's another great straightforward weapon. It's essentially a pocket sniper rifle. Even without mods, it's kind of a pocket sniper rifle because it can usually one-shot headshot enemies or one-shot weak spot shot them, whatever you want to say. You don't even necessarily need overclocks for it. That being said, it does have some really good overclocks, like volatile bullets hitting like an absolute truck, elephant rounds hitting like an absolute truck, special powder sometimes also hitting like an absolute truck, a little bit of variability there. Magic bullets being super useful for crowds and just great for anybody who doesn't want to bother aiming. The only not great overclock for the Revolver, which is still a bonus, is like Chain Hit. It's not really my favorite, but I would take it over having nothing on the Revolver. And then finally we have the Wave Cooker coming in last, which, I mean, a lot of people still really like the Wave Cooker. The thermal shock status effect with it is absolutely insane at times. You can clear up crowds really fast, you can clear up certain big enemies like Nexuses, because you can freeze or burn them multiple times really fast in succession, whether you're using the cryo cannon or the flamethrower. It makes for a nice complement with all the weapons. It's got infinite range, which is great for Driller, who is somewhat lacking in the range department. You're not always great against long-range enemies like Spitters and Menaces. And to be fair, the Wave Cooker is still not the best there, but it's better than nothing. So a group of great weapons. Now let's move on to the weapons that were picked the least during this. So for Driller, we had the Sabata, which got the least amount of votes, the Shard Diffractor for Engineer, the Crossbow for Scout, and the BRT Burst Pistol. I should mention on the BRT Burst Pistol that this was basically a tie. There was only about a 0.2% difference between the Burst Pistol and the Coil Gun. Both of them came very close to one another in the polls, and they weren't very far off from the Revolver. Once again, we had a complete landslide here with Engineer. The Shard Diffractor. Engineer has 3 really great secondaries that are basically primaries, and the Shard Diffractor actually won this poll even more than the Breach Cutter won the other poll. This one won by 51%, so still a very strong option, even though it was the least voted option. It should also be said that in Engineer's case, almost all of the weapons were very close to one another. They were between 5 and 10% off from one another, so I think that they were technically the closest in overall votes compared to all the other classes. The Crossbow came in second here at 21%. The Burst Pistol came in at third place at 16%, and the Sabata came in last place at 12%. Now again, none of these weapons are particularly bad. They can all be built pretty strong. These were just the least picked in their own categories. So let's talk about each of them. Shard Diffractor, pretty easy to see why it won out of all these. The Shard Diffractor is pretty crazy. It's got infinite range. It's got really high damage per second. Has some really strong overclocks too. Pretty much all of its overclocks are actually quite strong, where you have like Volatile Impact, where you essentially have the flamethrower but at long range, or at least ground fire at long range. Coming in second place was the Crossbow. A lot of people just picked it because of how fun it is, which I completely agree. The Crossbow is super fun to use. Has some issues, and it does take a lot of getting used to because it doesn't function quite like a lot of the other secondaries do. You can still have some pretty good combos with it, and its special bolts are very valuable, whether you want to throw on the lightning bolts, which do great damage against dreadnoughts and can slow dreadnoughts. Then you also got the pheromone bolts, let enemies attack you, and you also have the sticky explosive bolts pretty much that can also kill crowds pretty well. All of those are great. With overclocks, you got some really great ones too. You got bodkin points, which are super fun to use and really strong against crowds. Trifork volley, really good against big enemies. You have some other great options like Quickfire and Specialist, where if you really like special bolts, you can take them, or if you just want to have a dedicated long-range weapon, Quickfire is great for that. It pairs really good with the Drac. That way you have a long-range option and a close and medium-range option. You got pretty much every distance covered. The third place going to the Burst Pistol was a little bit surprising. I was actually thinking the Burst Pistol might beat out the Crossbow, just because I feel like the Burst Pistol is a far easier weapon to understand. It's not necessarily as flexible as the Crossbow, but it should get all the jobs done that you want it to. It does well at long range. It does well at killing small and big enemies. Some of its overclocks, like Lead Spray, are incredibly good. You also don't really have many bad overclocks for it. The only one that kind of stands out for me is Full Chamber Seal, which isn't even a bad overclock. It is still a bonus, but it's just a little bit lackluster. All the others are pretty good. And then coming in last place was the Sabata. This one was the least surprising. I figured the Sabata would lose. It still got above 10%, which I'm pretty happy about. A lot of people just pointed out that the Sabata feels like a basic pistol in a lot of other games, which, yeah, it kind of is. Not necessarily with overclocks, because it does have some really fun overclocks and some really good ones. Tranq Rounds is amazing because it has the longest stun in the game and a very high chance of hitting that stun. Explosive Reload is really strong, especially if you like taking it on escort missions or really any mission where you just want high single target damage from the pistol. And then you have like Automatic Fire, super fun overclock, and its high capacity magazines, I think, for the balanced overclock is also quite good, especially if you want to run Born Ready with either the Flamethrower or the Sledge Pump and just have a build where you never need to reload. So it's still got stuff going for it, and I totally understand why people would pick it. I also completely understand why it's the least picked, though. It's really interesting to see which ones get the most votes, which ones get the least votes, and people's reasoning as to why. Sometimes it's simply because a weapon or an overclock is super fun to use and really entertaining to watch. It could also be for the reason that it's just stupidly strong, like Engineer's case for secondaries. So if you like this video, be sure that you get subscribed. Special thanks to the supporters on this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube, patrons over on Patreon, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, be sure to check out this list right over here. Thanks.